Welcome to Horsemen. Episode 2, The White Horse.
Then I saw heaven opened, and behold, a white horse. The one sitting on it is called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he judges and makes war. Revelation chapter 19, verse 11. When Jonah McKennis was 8 years old, he fell in the parking lot of the West Depew Elementary School. It was a race, a short race, from the basketball net to the chain link fence. He was racing 3 other boys and 2 girls, and there were enough students watching that Jonah felt it was a very big deal. He started well, and for a moment felt like he could win, and then seemingly out of nowhere, 3 other children passed him. As he saw the chain-link fence approach and realized he would certainly not win and would probably be one of the last to finish, he suddenly experienced an overwhelmingly bad feeling. It was like a chill that tightened and made him feel small and weak. He did not have a name for it at the time, but it was shame. He was feeling a concentrated and intense shame. So without thinking, he responded to the intense feeling of shame by falling. He caught himself with his hands and scuffed his palms and one knee. And as he watched the other racers touch the chain link fence and he heard those watching cheer, he noted that the shame had been replaced by a different feeling, desire. He wanted people to cheer for him. He wanted that attention. He then made a decision that would set him on a course for the rest of his life. If he couldn't get the attention he desired by winning the race, he could get the attention some other way, and he chose not to get up. His good friend, Bob Marcinko, came over and asked, "You okay? Need a hand?" Jonah looked at him, frowned, and said, "I can't move my legs." "What?" asked Bob, not sure if he should laugh or take this seriously. I can't move my legs," Jonah repeated in such a convincing way that he was beginning to actually scare himself. I can't get up." Then Bob looked frightened, and Jonah watched him run to the playground monitor, Mr. May, the 5th grade science teacher and high school track coach, a man that Jonah respected and feared. He watched as Bob talked to Mr. May, and he saw the look of both concern and suspicion flutter across Mr. May's face. And that expression cemented Jonah's decision to go all the way. Although none of it was true, his legs were perfectly fine. He decided in that moment that he would not get up. Jonah was carried to the nurse's office and his mother was called. As Jonah waited in the office, remembering all the looks of concern and worry on the children's faces, something inside him opened up. It was a gush of warmth and pride. He liked this. It was the attention he wanted. In that moment, it didn't matter that it was pity rather than respect that everyone was offering him. Jonah's mother arrived and took him home, asking him lots of questions on the drive. But when Jonah couldn't get out of the car without holding tight onto his mother's side, she decided to take him to the emergency room in Syracuse, New York. This was a revelation for Jonah. By falling down and not getting up, he had accomplished several key goals that he didn't even know were his goals. He got out of school. School was stressful, and he would always rather be home. He got a lot of attention from peers. Granted, it was pity and curiosity, but it was still attention. And he got to spend a weekday with his mother, enjoying her full attention, not competing with her work or bills or any of the many things that usually distracted her. No, she was attending exclusively to him. He liked that day very much, and for years it never occurred to him what that day might have been like for his mother. It wasn't for another 35 years that he truly understood the pain she went through that day. While Jonah was relishing the attention and care he received from her and the nurses and doctors at the Syracuse hospital, she was terrified. The doctors had apparently told her they needed to test for possible muscular dystrophy, multiple sclerosis, possible neurological complications, and even cancer. They spent the next 2 days testing, and once they ruled out one terrible diagnosis, they would present an equally terrible possibility and test for that. Jonah learned later that she did not sleep that first night, and when the doctors threw up their hands and said they could not figure out why he had had this episode, the news did not reassure her. Jonah resumed normal walking the following day, but from that point forward, his mother watched for signs. She watched for anything that might be a symptom. She was nearly obsessive about it because he was all she had. Jonah's father had died when he was 2. Her own mother was dead, and her father, with whom she had had a difficult relationship, was back in Belfast, where both she and her husband were from. She had other family, but they were all more trouble than they were worth. She had friends, but friends are different than family. No, Jonah was her only true family, and she was terrified that she would lose him. None of this occurred to Jonah. All he knew was that pretending to be sick got him everything he wanted. The big message he got was that lying and manipulating people was actually pretty easy for him, so he did it again. The next year, after feeling a mixture of shame and loneliness at school, he told the other third graders that he had a pet chimpanzee who lived in his basement. He was impressed by how easily they were convinced. So long as he never had anyone over to his house to see that it was a lie, he could spin as many tales as he wanted. This became a theme for young Jonah. So long as he was able to keep people at a comfortable distance, he could maintain any narrative he wanted. And though he would not have identified the feeling as such, his ability to lie and get away with it made him feel proud. In 5th grade, he told his friends that his father was a KGB spy who abandoned his family and went back to Russia, and that when he was old enough, he was going to track the man down and kill him. He liked the shocked look on any boy or girl he said this to, like he was a tough guy, someone to take very, very seriously. This lie gave him not only pride, but power. He felt strong and confident. But by the time Jonah had his first drink, his lying wasn't working quite so well. He could still convince people of just about anything, but it was stressful and tiring. He was now lying full-time, making up lie after lie to keep his peers interested but not suspicious. This was increasingly difficult, since the older his friends got, the more questions they had and the more resources they had to test his lies. He was 12 years old and exhausted, full of fear and doubt, and when his 15-year-old neighbor handed him a bottle of Southern Comfort whiskey taken from his parents' liquor cabinet, Jonah shrugged like it was no big deal and took a drink. It tasted like he was drinking poison, like it was wolf pee or gasoline. It didn't seem right, like someone had switched up the liquids and was playing a trick on him. But from the look of expectation on his neighbor's face, how he and his friend seemed to be waiting for him to spit it out and say, "Oh, that's awful," he knew that he couldn't do that. Their subtle expressions were all the information he needed in that moment. He knew exactly what to do to gain their respect and trust. So he swallowed the disgusting drink and then proceeded to take another sip. "Not bad," he said, with as much confidence as he could muster. The neighbor and his friends laughed, clapped him on the back, and said he was cool. It was the right move. He felt so welcome and accepted, but it was nothing compared to what came a few minutes later. It started in his eyes. They felt hot and even stung a little, but not in a painful way, more like they had just worked very hard and were ready for a rest. Then he felt his tongue thicken. Again, not in an uncomfortable way, but more as if it was pleasantly numb, like it had been very busy licking cinnamon candy. This feeling spread throughout his head, and suddenly he felt a kind of padding surround him, like his head and body were wrapped in a security blanket keeping him warm and safe. All sounds were at a distance. His 15-year-old neighbor was at a distance. Even his thoughts and feelings were at a distance. he quite remarkably felt okay in the world. He hadn't realized how not okay he had been feeling up until this moment. It was as if he had discovered a wonderful secret, the special ingredient to finally help him be okay, be right, be himself. This feeling lasted for another 15 minutes before he started to puke. His memories at this point were sketchy, but he was pretty sure he threw up on his neighbor. He had vague memories of people yelling at him, but he didn't really care. He had found what he was looking for. The next day, he was sick all morning. His face felt tender, like he had bashed it into a wall. His tongue felt like it was a foreign creature living in his mouth, and his head throbbed with pain. But all he could think was, when can I do that again? It was actually a year before he did it again. He was about to turn 14 years old, and he found himself at a high school party where there was beer. When he took his first sip, he actually liked it. 2 beers later, he found that safety blanket again, and from that point on, he took advantage of any opportunity to have more of this wonderful elixir, whether it was in beer or wine or his eventual favorite, gin. Through high school, he kept his drinking down to only once a week on Friday night. It was something to look forward to, and though he often longed for the feeling during the week, 1 day a week worked for him. This expanded to 3 nights a week in college. Again, it didn't interfere with his studies, and as far as he could tell, partying on the weekends was common, at least with the students he spent time with. When he graduated and lied his way into his first sales job for a chain home improvement store, he felt it was his duty to drink with potential clients. It helped him, he told himself. It helped him seal the deal. And he did make his employer money. Between the calm and confidence that the drink offered him and his natural skill at bending the truth and getting people to do what he wanted them to do, he became the company's top salesman. Within a year, he was married and hired by his father-in-law to run the sales department of a local Syracuse television station. His father-in-law was impressed by Jonah's natural skill with people, and within 2 years, made him the CEO of the business. Jonah recognized he had a unique talent for reading people, knowing how they were feeling and what they were thinking. He could interpret subtle facial expressions and instinctively knew what to say or what to do to get people to bend to his desires. He also had a knack for knowing which direction to take the business. Even when data and consultants discouraged his ideas, it was as if a little voice in his head always knew what to do, which way to go, how much to pay, who to hire. When he trusted that voice, things generally went his way. He made deals. He acquired and integrated other businesses and over time built a small empire of New York State television, radio, and later internet media. He named it Salt Network after Syracuse's nickname, the Salt City. By then, he was drinking every day, usually starting at lunch and maintaining a buzz until he went to bed or passed out. He told himself and others that it served as a social lubricant. He said that it calmed him after a hard day. He said that it loosened him up for big meetings. He said that it wasn't a problem. He said that he didn't need it. He just liked it. He worked hard and played hard. It was no big deal. And then it became a big deal. He missed meetings, showed up drunk. He cheated on his wife. He behaved like an ass, and then no memory of it the next day. When he traveled to Sweden and met Raymond Anadar in the bar, he was taking an enforced break, away from the business and away from his wife. Some time to renew, to reconnect, to get some real rest. And meanwhile, though Jonah had no idea this was in the works, it was a chance for his board of directors to make some real decisions about the future of Salt Network, and a chance for his wife to file for divorce. It was a good 10 days for Jonah. He loved the beach, loved the company he kept, loved the 11 a.m. beer. And even though there was a lot going on in his life, he managed to remember his meeting with Dr. Anadar. He had given his "I'm an entrepreneur and make decisions from my gut" speech several times in the past. He'd like to be that guy, the one with the secrets and the golden touch. But there was something about the young man he met with the crazy ideas about fairy tales and growth cycles, something familiar, like they would one day cross paths again. He figured at the time that Raymond Anadar would call him would ask for more advice, and that he, the business guru, would help him get his book and then whatever else off the ground. It might be a good investment, he thought to himself. But when his 10 days were over and Jonah returned to get fired from Salt and divorced from his wife, he stopped thinking about Anadar and his book. No, he was more focused on how he was going to get back at those who had crossed him, betrayed him, those who would soon find out what they were losing. He plotted and he drank. He planned and he drank. He was angry and he was deeply hurt. But instead of feeling and seeing the situation for what it was, he drank. In time, he lost his house, moved to Utica, and rented a small apartment. He had no job and no prospects, but he continued to plot and plan how he would come back, how he would show them, how he would make them regret what they had done to him. It was 7 years after that meeting in Sweden when he heard about Dr. Raymond Anadar's success. He saw Anadar being interviewed on the Today Show. The young man had a beard now, but Jonah recognized him. Apparently, he had started an institute somewhere in Colorado where he was helping sick people get better. It wasn't a hospital, but some kind of woo-woo healing center. Jonah felt a surge of energy at this discovery and knew that he needed to find Anadar, go to Colorado, and claim what was his. It was Jonah's idea to write the book, and he should get credit, he figured. He should get some of the profits. Maybe they could work together, he wondered. Maybe this was going to be his big break. Jonah left Utica and used what little money he had to buy a bus ticket to Denver. When he arrived in Denver and couldn't immediately find information about Anadar and his healing center, he did the thing that he always did. He went to a bar. 6 months later, Jonah McKennis, former executive of the up-and-coming Salt Networks, was living between two cement columns under an overpass. He had no money, one set of clothes, and was begging on the street corner. When he met Mindy Lamb, he was holding up a sign that read, "From Alpha Centauri, need uranium for spaceship, anything helps." All his experience with sales and marketing was coming in handy for panhandling. He knew that first he needed to get someone's attention and interest, and once he had their pity, he would also have their money. He had several signs in his repertoire, but his two most successful were the Alpha Centauri sign and the one that only read Proverbs 14:31. The Proverbs sign worked well on weekends when people were more relaxed and curious. Some would ask what Proverbs 14:31 was, and he would then solemnly quote, "Whoever oppresses the poor shows contempt for their maker, but whoever is kind to the needy honors God." At that point, many people gave him money, and often larger bills like $5 or $10. The Alpha Centauri sign got him small change, but much more regularly. Drivers saw him as a fun-loving hobo who had put some effort into the sign. They smiled or laughed and then handed him 25 cents or maybe even $1. Not a fortune, but it added up. By the end of the day, he had enough for a fifth of cheap gin and maybe a convenience store cupcake. When Mindy Lamb, a woman who would soon figure centrally in his life, pulled to the stoplight and read his sign, she looked up into his eyes and asked, "Is it true?" Jonah raised his eyebrows, smiled, and asked, "Then I need uranium? No, but a taco would be great." Are you from Alpha Centauri?" she asked with an expression that now seemed a little desperate. He paused and wondered if the woman were crazy. "No, ma'am. It's just a silly sign, but I do need money." She was clearly disappointed. She looked down and then turned to get something from her wallet. She handed him a $10 bill and said, "Okay." A moment later, the light turned green and Mindy was about to leave when Jonah said, "Wait." There were no cars behind her, and she looked back up at him with a pleasant but resigned expression. "What are you looking for?" he heard himself ask. It was a strange and risky thing to ask, but for reasons he didn't understand, it seemed the appropriate question. She suddenly looked like she was about to cry. She shook her head and didn't speak. Jonah quickly scanned the woman and could tell that she was not well, that she was actually quite ill, and suddenly wondered if she had gotten some very bad news from her doctor. Then an idea flashed in his head, or rather in his heart. Raymond Anadar, the fairy tale guy who was the reason he came to Colorado. He had a healing center somewhere in Colorado. So without thinking, he blurted out, "Dr. Raymond Anadar can help you. Find him, go to his clinic, he can help you." She looked up at him with shock. She was about to ask him a question when a car came up behind her and started honking. She said, now flustered, "Thank you." And then she was gone. Jonah watched her drive away and felt in his heart that he had just helped someone, that he had just made a difference in someone's life. And with renewed enthusiasm, he realized that he was also speaking to himself. He needed to find Anadar, not to claim some prize or propose some wild plan, but because he needed help, and maybe the fairy tale doctor could help him. Well, Jonah was right about Mindy, the woman in the car. She was quite ill, and indeed she had just learned some bad news from her doctor. It seemed that she had giant cell myocarditis, and her prognosis was poor. Unless she received a heart transplant, she would likely be dead within the year. When she stopped at the red light and read Jonah's sign, something about him said he could help her, that he knew something, or perhaps would one day help her discover something that she needed to know. And it turned out he did. And it turned out he would. It turned out that one day they would talk about the sign he held on the street corner, and they would laugh at how accurate it truly was.